Imagine waking up to find your water bucket frozen solid, your livestock dead in the barn, and no way to call for help. For frontier settlers in the 1800s, this wasn't a nightmare scenario. It was often their daily reality during winter months. In this frozen battlefield where temperatures could plummet to 40 below zero, ordinary men and women developed extraordinary methods to stay alive. The 6 survival techniques you're about to discover weren't just helpful skills. They were the difference between life and death on the American frontier. The winter of 1887 brought a stark lesson to the Dakota Territory when a sudden, violent blizzard swept across the plains. Over 500 souls perished in that deadly storm, many within mere yards of their own doorsteps, betrayed by whiteout conditions that rendered the familiar landscape an unrecognizable death trap. Their tragic end stands as a grim reminder of how quickly the elements could claim even those who thought themselves safe. For settlers streaming westward, shelter represented the threshold between life and extinction. The quaint clapboard houses and timber frames that served adequately in eastern states became harbingers of finality on the open prairie, where winter winds howled unimpeded for hundreds of miles. These transplanted eastern designs, with their drafty walls and inadequate insulation, offered minimal protection against temperatures plummeting to 30 below zero. Eastern construction methods simply couldn't withstand the unforgiving prairie environment. The mathematics of heat loss proved brutally simple. A body exposed to prairie winter conditions could succumb within hours, while blizzards might rage for weeks. The settlers who survived were those who adapted rapidly, often by embracing the knowledge of those who understood this harsh landscape. Indigenous wisdom became life-saving currency during those first winters. One account from the Jensen family of South Dakota documented how an elderly Lakota man showed them how to reposition their home's entrance southward before winter arrived. When the blizzard of 1888 struck, the Jensens credited this simple change with preserving their lives while neighboring families perished. The Plains tribes had developed sophisticated building approaches over generations, and the wisest settlers adopted these methods. South-facing entrances harnessed the sun's warming rays throughout the day, a critical advantage when every degree of warmth meant continued survival. Where timber was scarce, the humble sod house emerged as an unexpected sanctuary. These structures, though primitive in appearance, performed remarkably in extreme conditions. Their thick earthen walls created natural insulation that maintained livable temperatures even when the world outside turned hostile. A well-built soddy could keep the interior above freezing while outdoor temperatures reached 30 below. The most successful frontier families developed integrated shelter systems, carefully engineered survival stations. Many built earthen berms around their homes to break the howling winds that could strip heat from walls. Room layouts became strategic decisions, with cooking areas positioned to maximize heat distribution. Some incorporated animal shelters directly into their home designs, using livestock as living radiators whose body heat helped warm the human quarters through shared walls. Many homesteaders created multiple defensive layers against the cold, from windbreaks of planted trees to snow fences that prevented drifts from entombing their homes. Inside, they hung heavy cloth partitions to create smaller, more easily heated spaces during the coldest periods. These weren't merely comforts, but essential strategies that determined whether a family would witness the spring thaw or meet their final moments in the unforgiving embrace of winter. Beyond those cloth partitions and protective berms lay an even greater challenge: the unrelenting cold itself that could claim any settler whose heat source failed during the night. Frontier diaries reveal a grim reality: families discovering neighbors frozen solid in their beds after a single night without fire, their bodies hardened like timber in the merciless cold. Martha Hensley's 1874 diary captures this horror vividly. "We found the Andersons this morning, all 4 still as statues in their beds, their faces blue as twilight. Their stove had gone cold before midnight. In the vast, treeless expanses of the prairie, keeping a fire burning represented desperate necessity. The potbelly stove, the pulsing heart of a frozen homestead, became central to frontier survival. Its distinctive bulging center maximized heat radiation while minimizing fuel consumption. These remarkable devices burned virtually anything combustible, from traditional wood to twisted prairie grass, corn cobs, and even stranger, more desperate alternatives. What did families burn when conventional fuels disappeared? The true ingenuity of frontier settlers emerged in these moments. Buffalo chips, the dried dung of bison that once roamed the plains in massive herds, became precious heating resources despite their unpleasant odor. A family might spend entire days gathering these natural fuel sources. They stacked them meticulously to ensure they would last through the darkest months. During these periods, venturing outside could prove fatal within minutes. Some turned to even more unusual solutions. Animal bones, carefully collected and dried, produced intense heat when proper wood was unavailable. These desperate measures marked the difference between survival and tragedy. Perhaps most remarkable was the adaptation of Native American heating methods. The Lakota technique of heating volcanic rocks offered an elegant solution to overnight warmth. These porous stones, once heated in a fire, radiated heat for hours like natural furnaces. Settlers placed these stones throughout their homes or wrapped them in cloth as bed warmers, providing crucial defense against hypothermia during the deadly overnight hours. Strategic heat management determined who would greet the spring. Banking coals became a nightly ritual of survival. Carefully covering embers with ashes preserved them until morning, without consuming precious fuel overnight. This delicate balance ensured that when dawn broke, the fire could be quickly rekindled, rather than starting anew. The most successful settlers approached heating with systematic precision. Families constructed their beds directly above kitchen areas. Rising heat warmed sleeping quarters through carefully placed floor openings. Children often slept in lofts where the warmest air collected. Adults might take the colder ground floor positions. Some particularly resourceful settlers built warming tunnels beneath sleeping platforms, channeling heat from the main fire through stone-lined passages. The morning routine of rekindling fires served as both practical necessity and psychological victory. Those first moments of tending flames represented another night survived, another triumph against winter's determination to claim their lives. For these frontier families, fire represented more than comfort. It was life itself, the barrier between existence and eternity, in a landscape where nature showed no mercy to the unprepared. While fire kept settlers alive through the night, stepping beyond the cabin threshold meant facing winter's full assault with only clothing as protection. The Donner Party tragedy revealed how even adequate shelter and provisions couldn't save those whose garments failed against winter's merciless grip. For frontier settlers, clothing represented something far more critical than appearance. It was portable fortress, a survival system where every thread stood between life and death. Eastern clothing proved disastrously inadequate on the frontier. The fashionable cotton garments that served perfectly well in Philadelphia or Boston became death sentences in Dakota winters. Cotton, when dampened by sweat or snow, lost all insulating properties and accelerated body heat loss. Settlers who failed to adapt their wardrobes faced swift consequences. Frostbite claiming extremities within minutes, followed by hypothermia's creep that dulled the mind before claiming lives. Those who survived discovered that layering was essential science. Rather than relying on single thick garments, frontier veterans adopted multiple thin layers that created insulating air pockets between them. This approach trapped body heat with remarkable efficiency while allowing crucial adaptability, much like modern mountaineering gear does today, but with far simpler materials. As work intensified and body temperature rose, layers could be removed to prevent sweating, then added back when activity ceased, preventing the deadly cooling effect of damp clothes against skin. The frontier wardrobe required constant maintenance using techniques unheard of in eastern cities. Leather boots and gloves, essential for work in deep snow, became useless when frozen stiff unless properly treated. One settler from Minnesota documented how he salvaged his family's only pair of work boots during the brutal winter of 1857 by laboriously working bear fat into the leather each evening by their fire, creating a supple, waterproof barrier that lasted through weeks of heavy use. These treatments transformed ordinary garments into sophisticated winter armor that maintained crucial flexibility while repelling moisture. Among textiles, wool emerged as the frontiersman's most valuable material resource. Unlike cotton, wool maintained up to 80% of its insulating capacity even when soaked through. This remarkable property made the difference between life and death during unexpected storms or when crossing frozen rivers. Wool sweaters and shawls became prized possessions, often worn continuously from the first frost until spring thaw. The most successful settlers abandoned their cultural pride and adopted indigenous clothing technologies perfected over thousands of years. Native American moccasins lined with rabbit fur provided insulation far superior to European-style boots, while allowing feeling and flexion that prevented trips and falls. Leather outer garments blocked piercing winds, while allowing the body's moisture to escape, preventing the dangerous dampness that led to hypothermia. Perhaps most critical was the protection of extremities, where subtleties in design determined survival. The simple choice between mittens and gloves could preserve or cost fingers. Mittens kept fingers together, creating shared warmth that maintained circulation, while separated fingers in gloves quickly lost heat and froze. These seemingly minor design choices often determined who would emerge from winter with all limbs intact. Beyond warmth and protection from the elements, frontier settlers fought a more insidious battle inside their homes. While the Sierra Nevada mountains witnessed the most tragic example of winter's deprivation in 1846–47, every frontier family faced the same fundamental equation. Food stored before winter must sustain every member until spring thaw. Unlike modern households, where emptying the pantry means a trip to the grocery store, miscalculation on the frontier meant no second chances. Underground, beneath many frontier homes, lay the first line of defense against starvation. Root cellars functioned as life insurance policies dug into the earth, where temperatures remained just above freezing, regardless of the brutal conditions above. These subterranean vaults preserved vegetables through the darkest months, providing crucial nutrition when the body needed it most. Families who maintained these spaces effectively avoided the devastating effects of nutritional deficiencies that could otherwise decimate frontier communities during winter's grip. The preservation arsenal extended beyond simple storage. Fermentation transformed ordinary vegetables into survival rations that increased rather than diminished in nutritional value over time. Cabbage became sauerkraut, cucumbers became pickles, and various vegetables were preserved in carefully prepared brine solutions. These foods served as medicine disguised as food, providing essential vitamins that prevented nutritional collapse when strength was most needed. Wisdom borrowed from Native American tribes often determined which families thrived and which perished. Pemmican represented perhaps the most complete nutritional technology adopted by frontier settlers. This concentrated mixture of dried meat, animal fat, and berries created a perfect survival food containing all necessary nutrients that remained edible for years without spoiling. The Johnson family of Nebraska Territory credited their survival during the blizzard of 1857 to the pemmican stores they had prepared following advice from Pawnee neighbors. A single pouch sustained each family member for days when trapped indoors without fresh supplies. The settlers, who survived multiple winters, developed calculated nutritional defense systems. They stored specific food varieties that addressed predictable threats the body faced during cold months. Vitamin C-rich preserves counteracted scurvy, while protein-dense preparations maintained muscle mass and the body's ability to generate heat. These frontier nutritionists, through trial and error, recognized that certain foods maintained health in ways others couldn't. Food preservation became a mathematical science of survival. Families calculated exactly how many pounds of dried meat, bushels of potatoes, and jars of preserved fruits would sustain each person through winter isolation. Careful rationing systems emerged, with daily portions measured precisely to ensure supplies would last. The margin for error remained frighteningly thin. Rodents getting into grain stores or unexpected mold in preserved vegetables could tip the balance from survival to starvation. What separated survivors from those who perished was often the quality and diversity of stored food. The settlers who emerged from their cabins in spring with families intact understood that winter food maintained the body's internal furnace. When outside temperatures plummeted far below zero and wood supplies dwindled, properly nourished bodies generated critical internal heat, while malnourished ones gradually cooled until life could no longer be sustained. A well-nourished body provided essential internal warmth, but when settlers ventured beyond their cabin walls, the deadliest season demanded specialized tools that determined who would survive. The infamous schoolhouse blizzard of 1888 painted this reality in stark terms when it swept across the Great Plains without warning. Over 235 people, mostly schoolchildren, perished in the whiteout, many within yards of safety. As one survivor later recounted, We could see the lights of home through the swirling snow, but couldn't reach them. Those without proper tools never stood a chance. These victims didn't lack courage or determination. They lacked the critical implements that experienced frontiersmen never traveled without. The frontier's most successful survivors recognized that winter's killing methods were predictable, even if its timing wasn't. When temperatures plummeted 40 degrees in minutes and visibility vanished, simple journeys between home and barn became life-threatening expeditions. The difference between reaching shelter alive or becoming a frozen statue, discovered days later, hinged on carrying the right tools, implements largely forgotten in our modern age. Snow knives emerged as indispensable for anyone traveling during winter months. These specialized blades could quickly cut blocks from compacted snow, enabling the rapid construction of emergency shelters when caught in sudden storms. Experienced settlers could fashion windbreaks or crude shelters within minutes, creating life-saving barricades against the teeth of the storm. These same tools cleared paths through massive drifts, preventing the deadly exhaustion that claimed many newcomers who attempted to push through shoulder-high snow. Fire-starting capabilities underwent a remarkable evolution on the frontier, reflecting the stakes involved. Veteran settlers developed redundant systems that ensured flame under any condition. Waterproof containers held multiple ignition methods: char cloth, magnifying lenses for sunny days, and matches treated with wax. When a Nebraska homesteader's matches dampened during an 1875 blizzard, his inability to start a fire meant his body wasn't discovered until spring thaw, frozen in a position of desperate struggle. The ability to create immediate heat represented the boundary between life and death. Navigation and mobility tools formed complementary survival systems when blizzards transformed familiar landscapes into featureless white voids. Disorientation killed as efficiently as cold. Settlers strung guide ropes between buildings, hammered tall stakes along common paths, and carried compasses as standard equipment. These countered winter's ability to make well-known terrain completely unrecognizable. Paired with mobility tools like snowshoes adapted from Native American designs, settlers could both navigate and traverse landscapes that would otherwise become impassable prisons. The difference between walking atop snow versus fighting through it determined whether necessary winter tasks could be completed. The humblest tools sometimes provided the greatest margin of safety. Snow shovels, kept within reach of doors and windows, prevented the potentially lethal entrapment that occurred when massive drifts sealed cabins shut. Inside these buried structures, fires would gradually consume available oxygen, leading to suffocation if occupants couldn't clear ventilation or exits. These simple implements weren't luxury items, but essential components of frontier survival systems that separated the living from the dead. Beyond the tools in a settler's trunk lay the frontier's most powerful survival mechanism: the community itself. The bitter Minnesota winter of 1856–57 delivered a stark lesson when temperatures remained at 40 below for weeks. While isolated homesteaders vanished beneath the drifts, settlements where families united against the cold emerged intact despite equally brutal conditions. This pattern repeated across the frontier, revealing a fundamental truth that many proud pioneers refused to acknowledge until too late. Those who faced winter alone rarely lived to tell their tale. The independent spirit that drove westward expansion proved deadly during winter's grip. Cultural differences and fierce self-reliance had to be set aside when snow buried the landscape. Communities that survived developed sophisticated cooperative systems that addressed every aspect of winter's threat. These were formalized practices that evolved specifically to keep everyone alive through the deadliest months. Consider the harrowing blizzard of 1862 that struck Nebraska territory. The Wilkinson family, newcomers from Pennsylvania, found themselves trapped as temperatures plummeted and snow piled 6 feet high within hours. Their neighbors, the Hansons and Petersons, trudged through dangerous conditions to reach them, bringing food and extra blankets. For 3 weeks, the families rotated between homes, sharing dwindling supplies and taking turns stoking fires. When the storm finally broke, their settlement remained whole, while news arrived of lone homesteads found with frozen bodies. Frontier wood-cutting parties transformed a solitary chore into a communal lifeline. These organized groups ensured every household maintained adequate fuel reserves through the coldest periods. The system prevented the isolated deaths that frequently claimed stubborn homesteaders who refused assistance. By distributing heavy labor across many hands, communities created a mutual insurance policy against freezing. Food sharing evolved from occasional charity into structured rotation systems. Settlements established practices where families with surplus regularly contributed to those facing temporary shortages. This approach created resilience against the unpredictable nature of frontier harvests, where a single crop failure could mean starvation without community support. The transfer of knowledge between experienced and novice settlers proved equally vital. Veterans taught newcomers critical skills, recognizing atmospheric changes preceding storms, identifying edible plants beneath snow, and navigating when landmarks disappeared under drifts. This knowledge exchange often determined survival when weather turned deadly. These interconnected survival strategies, resource sharing, labor distribution, and knowledge transfer, formed a comprehensive system that transformed individual vulnerability into collective strength. During the worst blizzards, shelter sharing became standard practice, with families consolidating into fewer buildings to reduce fuel requirements while multiplying body heat. The most successful winter communities developed complete social systems addressing every aspect of cold weather survival. Perhaps most crucial was the psychological support these gatherings provided. Settlements that maintained regular social activities through winter prevented the deadly depression that claimed many isolated pioneers. The Johnson settlement in Dakota Territory survived the notorious winter of 1871 by establishing weekly gatherings featuring music and storytelling. While 3 nearby homesteads lost settlers who took their own lives and exposure that season, the Johnson community endured intact, demonstrating how shared humanity often made the difference between life and death on the winter frontier. As our journey through the brutal reality of frontier winters comes to a close, we're left with historical lessons that shaped human resilience. The frontier experience teaches us that true strength emerges from connection rather than isolation. Communities thrived through shared resources and knowledge, withstanding nature's harshest tests. Their meticulous preparation, stockpiling essentials, and developing seasonal strategies exemplifies timeless wisdom. Their adaptability in adopting indigenous techniques and creative approaches remains relevant today. These principles still inform modern emergency preparedness. What can we learn from these frontier survivors that might help us face our own challenging circumstances? Their legacy of ingenuity continues to save lives centuries later.